This video is sponsored in part by Best Buy. Have you ever put on a pair of headphones and thought, hey, it's not terrible, but I wish I could tweak the sound just a little bit to make it sound a bit more like how I want. But maybe you're afraid or overwhelmed by the EQ settings. Well, this video is for you. My name is Brandon Lee, and I've been a professional live sound engineer for over 15 years, mixing for various bands, conferences, and events. And I'm here to share a few foundational tips to help you get a better sound out of your headphones or earbuds. Now, keep in mind what I'm sharing is generally true, but every EQ app and system may EQ frequencies differently from another app or system. This is especially the case when some apps only provide 3 EQ bands compared to something that gives you 5 EQ bands like the Sony headphones app, or even more bands like Wavelet if you want to do more advanced EQing. With that said, this video is intended to provide general rules of thumb and best practices to help you understand how EQ works, and then go from there based upon your specific situation. That means for those who are super advanced with EQ on a more professional mixing level, just know that this is targeted towards everyday people and consumers, so go easy on me. Now, if you're planning on EQing something like the Sony WH-1000XM5s, which you can check out by clicking the link in the description, it's probably best to get the lay of the land, and to do that, we're gonna bring in some dwarfs. Yeah, some dwarfs. This chart was super helpful for me when I started mixing, and it really does give you an easy idea of associating frequencies with what makes them sound bad when there's too much of it in a mix. Now, all these frequencies are important and necessary for various things sounding the way that they do, like various instruments and voices, and what makes them sound good. Because of that, I wouldn't say that there's a bad frequency, so the goal of EQing things is to adjust frequencies that are crowding the room, so to speak, and to make room for others, and that allows things to sound balanced so all the instruments and vocals can come through clearly with great detail. I've linked the 2 charts I showed on the screen in the description if you want to look into it a bit more. Now, it's important to know what not to do, and trust me, I've done all of these plenty of times, and I still find myself doing it at times. But these things can really get in the way of you getting a good EQ. How many of you have gone into the EQ of whatever thing, and the first thing that you do is turn up the frequencies, and only turn up the frequencies? If that's you, you made one of the most common mistakes out there with EQ. You see, if you turn every EQ slider up to max, you'll have a perception of it sounding better, but all you did was turn the volume up. That's because of how our ears work, where they're not as sensitive to lower and higher frequencies at lower volumes compared to higher volumes. On top of that, things sound more present and close to you at higher volumes. So instead of me just saying a bunch of things, let's experience it. Here's an example of a song, and tell me which one you prefer. What's crazy is that the only thing different between the two is that A is 5 decibels louder than B. If you want to geek out on this phenomenon more, look up loudness bias, the Fletcher-Munson curves, and equal loudness contours. Now let's listen to a recording of the XM5s with all the EQ bands turned up to max, which would look like this on a more complex equalizer, and then one with it flat. We'll use this crazy set of ears to be able to listen to it. Now let's hear what it sounds like if the volumes are matched. Let me know in the comments what difference you hear. Now, with loudness bias in mind, and with headphone and earbud app EQs in particular, it's important to find a kind of baseline for EQ. But what do I mean by that? Say your EQ looks like this, especially with the 2 over here on the left. With this, I would lower everything down by at least 2, since a good chunk of my EQ is sitting around +2. So this adjustment would just make them 0. This is helpful when comparing different EQ presets because you're mitigating the difference in volume between them. And if you do notice a volume difference between the 2, just adjust your volume button a little bit by a click to see if you can match it a little bit. Otherwise, well, you're just tricking yourself. Now, the first tip for EQing is to cut before boosting, and you're probably starting to notice a trend that the way to EQ isn't by turning everything up all the way like a cliche movie scene. In the audio world, it is much better to cut first before you boost anything. The boosting is a bit like the sprinkles on top of a sundae, while the cutting is the main part of the dessert. Remember these dwarves? That chart comes in handy here. Instead of boosting, listen to what you hear and think, what frequencies am I hearing that seem to be overbearing, taking over the sound and making it not sound as clear or as bright as I want, or makes it sound harsh and tinny. If it's really dark, doesn't seem clear, and maybe too bassy, then you start cutting some of the lower frequencies first. Here's an example where I'll start lowering the low end and just listen to how it kind of cleans things up a little bit. See how the kick drum feels a little bit tighter and not as crowding in the mix? Now here's something interesting. Let's crank the bass all the way up. Listen to how it's kind of crowding up the sound a little bit. Now let's actually compare it with the flat EQ so you can actually hear what's going on. See how much brighter the flat frequencies are in comparison? It's crazy. Now let's go back. Yeah, it's just kind of crowding the mix a little bit. It's very interesting. We'll bring it back down. It sounds a little bit fuller and clearer. And then we can clean up the low end again. Now before I share more about how to EQ, big shout out to Best Buy for sponsoring this portion of the video and giving me a chance to show off the Sony WH-1000XM5 headphones. Now I've already reviewed these in depth and can confidently say that the Sony XM5s have industry-leading microphones that make you shockingly sound good and clear when you're on the phone or a video call, regardless of whether you're inside, outside, and around tons of noise. Sony is honestly knocking it out of the park here. Now you can't look at 1000XM series headphones or earbuds and not think of some of the best active noise cancellation out there. And this is no exception. With the XM5s, they added additional microphones on the inside of the ear cup to catch any artifacts that make its way through the normal ANC mics to cancel out even more sound. What's even crazier is that it actively adapts and adjusts over and over again depending on your environment or the fit of your headphones on your head, so it's always optimized. These are also super comfortable and light. Right now, if I'm going on a trip and traveling and want to bring a pair of headphones with me, the XM5s are the ones I'd bring with me. If you want to pick up the Sony XM5s, you can do so now at Best Buy. It's available for in-store pickup and there are fast delivery options available. You can get started on your order now by clicking the link in the description. Thanks so much to Best Buy for sponsoring this portion of the video. Okay, you've probably heard all these things and then you go and look at the EQ app and you're like, where do I start though? Well, I think for the average person, I would start with lower frequencies and work your way up. More often than not, headphones will have a ton of low end boosted and at times it can make the low end a bit overbearing, intense, or muddy in the overall sound. Controlling this area of the frequency range will often clean things up, tighten up the low end, and in turn address most of the issues in the mix. Add in the fact that low end frequencies compared to high end frequencies actually take up more of the faders and a more robust EQ app or in actual EQ programs. And that's because of how wide their waveforms are and how specific or surgical you have to be in terms of your actual EQ. And when you're taming the low end, it'll often take care of the frequencies higher and higher up on the spectrum. It kind of compounds on each other. Just remember how previously we cut the low end and how it actually made it sound brighter. Now, despite me saying it's best to start lower, that's not a hard rule. At the end of the day, if you have a good ear and can hear a specific frequency that's really overbearing, you can just address it, but it's generally better to kind of start lower. Now here's a neat trick that mixing engineers often use. Oftentimes they'll listen to something, they'll identify something in their head that they think it's probably in a certain range, and then they'll boost and sweep between different EQ frequencies to verify what frequency they're actually hearing. That's a way of kind of matching what they're hearing with what's actually true. Now when they do this and they find the frequency that matches mostly what they heard in their head, they start cutting the frequency and adjusting how severely they cut or boost to see how it sounds in context with the rest of the frequencies. The hard part about this is that it does come down to having a trained ear for things and definitely comes down to taste. Now the next tip is to test and compare between multiple songs of different styles and genres. Pick good songs that you are familiar with and know or have a feeling that they have good production and mixing. Oftentimes mainstream music that's on the radio is highly produced and you've probably heard the song many times in different environments, so you can kind of have a general idea of how it's supposed to sound. Checking between songs gives you a chance to find a good balance to your EQ to make sure it's translating well across the majority of songs rather than just one song. You'll find that EQing things is an extremely hard puzzle and can involve a bit of a compromise for the greater good of an improved sound for all rather than fantastic sound for one song and not great for others. Okay, now with all that said, let me try to put together an EQ live and I'll explain a bit of what I'm doing. Keep in mind I'm listening to how the headphones sound through this microphone into my earbuds rather than wearing the headphones directly on my head, so it's especially hard for me to get the sound that I want, but the general principles that we talked about will still be used. Okay, so I'm cutting right here to see what kind of color the 1K is adding to things. And that way I could add more to it or remove it if I want to. So you can actually boost or cut to kind of get the difference between what you want. Wow, I like how that brightens things up a lot. So I might actually do this, lower these two, so I don't have to boost this as much. Let's compare it with this one over here. So this is adding a bit of air. It's adding a little bit of that clarity to the voice too. I do like a little bit of that low in there to add a little bit of kick, but the 400's adding a little bit of tubbiness to things I don't really like. We'll keep it at 0 and see how that sounds. Maybe down 1. This one sounds a lot like more congested in the low end, in the mids. Yeah, see how like the difference between those two? The custom EQ sounds so much clearer. Like the high end is able to kind of breathe a little bit more. It still sounds full, and if you want to, you can, you know, test it out and adjust things. Maybe you want to boost up the clear bass 1 more, keep it at 0 if you want, or you can keep adjusting things. This is a fluid thing where you can keep adjusting things as you listen to things over time. So this is a very mid-ranging song, so it might really bring out how muddy the flat one can sound. Let's go to custom. Yeah, way more clear. Maybe it doesn't feel as full, so I'll bring up the bass just a little bit. Okay, let's listen to how things sound between my custom EQ and the flat EQ, but at equal volumes. And let me know in the comments how you think it turned out. Now give it a shot and put your custom EQs in the comments. If you want my custom EQs for the Sony WH-1000XM5s and other headphones and earbuds, I've shared them with my channel members, so go check it out. Let me know if this is helpful, and if you have any questions in the comments, and in the This Is Tech Today Community Discord chat server. There's a link for that in the description next to the link to pick up the Sony XM5s from Best Buy, or you can click right here. You can also check out my other videos on audio over here. Thanks for watching This Is Tech Today. Until next time.